Today we are going to continue our Mott MacDonald Prosilience series that we started a couple of months ago. My name is Khdeir. I am the Regional Development Director at Mott MacDonald in the Middle East region. And at the beginning of this series, we raised a couple of fundamental questions related to our construction industry. And the first one was, how can we change the way we work in our sector? And the second one, how can we improve our construction sector by embracing the digital front? So just going back for clarity on the word prosilience, which has two fundamental components so that we can be proactive and resilient in our approach, but through providing a system, a proactive system, and then taking it beyond where a group of systems interacting with each other to, in a proactive way, to provide resilience for our client or our cities. So the series, as I started saying, we covered many topics. I will go just quickly on the program. So at the beginning, we covered smart infrastructure. Then later, the digital ventures, which is a part of Mott MacDonald, where we work closely with the startups and venture through the digital domain. Afterwards, we covered the cybersecurity with a focus on the Middle East. Then new ways of working, especially with COVID-19 impact on everybody and on businesses. And the last piece was at the first part of these sessions was for DFMA, Design for Manufacture and Assembly, and Future Mobility. So now we are at session 4, where we are going to explore with Mark Enzer, our Chief Technical Officer, Flourishing Systems. In a couple of weeks' time, we are going to have a session focused on water sector, and we call it Resilience in the Round, where we will explore a combination of security of supply, desalination, and asset management all together. And the last session in this series will be about climate change, where we are going to explore with John the climate change and how we preserve our wealth. So a little bit of a refresher. We explored at the beginning of this series and throughout the sessions some of the global challenges our industry is facing. So we touched on the digital maturity and how the construction sector lagged behind majority of the sectors in the maturity of adoption to digital. We looked at the water availability and scarcity, especially in the Middle East, and how is that need to be addressed going forward. We touched also on the climate change and some examples of incidents that was happening in the GCC area. Then later on the cybersecurity, and the last one on the population concentration and urbanization. Then from these global challenges with a local or regional flavor, we explored also the opportunities that these challenges will give us for going forward. And we explored some of them in depth. So I touched on earlier on DFMA, Design for Manufacture and Assembly, and its impact socially, economically, and also from technical point of view. We shared some of the latest technologies that they are in action and in use in the construction industry, such as BIM, the virtual, the rehearsals, augmented reality and design, and automation also in design. Then after that, we took it at a little bit of a macro level, and we explored the smart infrastructure, going through the pyramid of the data integration, sensing, and decision making, and of course the impact on cities. Now, in this second part of this series, we thought it would be good to take it to the strategic level. And that's why in the next 3 sessions, including today, we are going to explore the strategic macro level and the impact on that going across each sectors. So with that, my introduction comes to an end. It would be my pleasure to welcome Mark Enzer, our Chief Technical Officer, who will take us in an exciting journey. I would say it's called Flourishing Systems. And then beyond the presentation, we will have hopefully some minutes for questions and answers to Mark. So Mark, over to you.
Laura, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you very much indeed to the people on the call and listening in. Thank you for inviting me to share with you this vision of flourishing systems. Really, what this is about is envisaging a better way for infrastructure. And what I'd like to do in introducing this is just point to the report that we produced fairly recently. This was between the Centre for Digital Britain and the Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction at Cambridge University. And it's basically on this report that I'd like to share. And you can easily Google it or follow that link. But I'd commend the paper to you because it's very simple, very high level, but introduces some quite important I think fundamental ways of thinking about our infrastructure for the benefit of people. And so what it's articulating is this vision in 2 parts. One is that it should be people focused and the other system based. So what we mean by people focused is that we need to recognize the fundamental role of infrastructure in the social, economic and environmental outcomes that really determine the quality of people's lives. And then also systems-based to recognize infrastructure as a complex, interconnected system of systems that basically must deliver continuous service to society. So that's the kind of the fundamentals of it. But then within the report, we cover 4 key areas: a focus on people. This whole people focus, understanding the importance of outcomes and human flourishing, a focus on the connections and recognizing that we do have a system of systems, a focus on sustainability and the long-term viability of our infrastructure. And then finally, a focus on digitalization and recognizing the value that we can unlock through cyber physical systems. So what I'd like to do is first take you on a bit of a journey to kind of set the context, to build a picture, to illustrate that we do have a system of systems. So that's really to just build the context within which these 4 points will then make sense. And then what I'd like to do is come back to each of those 4 points and expand on them a bit. And then basically our time will be up and we'll be done. So let's see how this picture builds of our infrastructure. And if we start with transport, something that's very familiar to us, that itself is a complex interconnected system. You know, whether we look just at trains or at road systems or our air transport, each one of those is complex and interconnected. You add them together, you get what should really be more integrated than it is, but it's definitely a complex interconnected system. You see the very same thing with our energy systems. They're complex and interconnected. They will become more so as we move towards having prosumers and distributed energy generation. So the energy system is complex and interconnected. But as we know, it's connected into everything else. It'll be increasingly so as we move towards having electric vehicles. So the energy system is kind of a spine of the other networks. That you could say is also true for telecoms, which itself is a complex interconnected system. But really, we need that to make everything else work, because energy doesn't work without telecoms, and likewise our transport. We can move on to another complex interconnected system that sometimes we don't pay so much attention to. It seems to be sometimes a little bit out of sight, out of mind, but definitely complex and interconnected, and utterly reliant on energy and telecoms. But interestingly, other sectors rely on water too. So energy basically doesn't work unless it's got the right supply of water. And then finally, I guess if we're talking about economic infrastructure, we come to waste, which might not look so complex or interconnected yet. But as we look forwards to a circular economy, and so we don't see things as waste, but we see it as a resource which can be used again and again, then clearly that will become much more interconnected. So that kind of paints a bit of a picture of the economic infrastructure. But that's not the end of the story, because also we have all the social infrastructure, hospitals, prisons, schools, none of which work unless that economic infrastructure is all connected up. And then I guess there's residential, commercial, industrial buildings, which are very similar in many ways. That they are utterly reliant on the system of systems that I'm gradually describing. The story is nearly at an end. But the final part of the picture I want to just add is the interface with the natural environment, which, as we know, itself is a complex interconnected system. But when we overlay on that everything that I've talked about before and understand the interfaces with it, then we see that it truly is complex and interconnected. So you'll have to forgive me for kind of overemphasizing that complexity and the connectedness, but I do kind of do it on purpose, because what I'm trying to build is this final picture of our built environment. Because when we add everything together, each individual layer is a complex interconnected system. When we add it up and see what we've got in our built environment, it is the most amazing machine. I would suggest that it's the most amazing, most expensive, most complex, most interconnected machine that humans have built. You know, we look at some clever things like supercomputers or space rockets and think that those are the kind of pinnacle of human achievement. And we kind of forget our built environment because it's so familiar to us. But when we see just how amazing it is and how utterly essential it is to our ways of life, then I think we can see it as this most amazing machine that we have built for our benefit. And so if you put all those systems together, you see the picture. So I've spent some time going through that, but really the reason for it is to establish the fact that we do have a system of systems in our built environment. It's not something that we really look at or take notice of. It's almost hiding in plain sight. But the fact is, we have got this most amazing system of systems that we can use for the benefit of society. And so what I'd like to go on to now is just unpacking some of those 4 points that I touched on before, and just understand what this means for us and where we can get more value if we see the system. So the first thing I think is to point out that in developed economies, we have 99, maybe 99.5% of the infrastructure that we need already. It's already built. It's meant to last for a decent amount of time. And then each year we add to it 0.5, 1%. Now in the UK, that 0.5% is hugely important. You know, that is our construction industry. It's worth something like 9% of GDP. So it is hugely important. And in itself, it matters. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if we only focus on construction, we missed the stuff that we've already got. We missed the 99.5%. And so the argument here really is that our infrastructure strategies should be for the 100%. It's for the new stuff, but also the stuff that we already have, that I've laboured the point of how an important and valuable, essential machine that is. So it's just kind of recognising what we already have and making our strategies address the whole thing. The other point, I guess, kind of moving on to the people side of things, is to recognise that it is actually the system that delivers the outcomes that we want. Very often we think about our individual projects delivering outcomes, but the highest level outcomes that we want, a balance of social, economic, and environmental outcomes, they really come from the system. The system provides the services and the services deliver the outcomes. And so I think it's really helpful for us to see our projects in the construction industry as interventions on the system. It's kind of the system that delivers the value. And what we want to do is tweak the system to deliver the outcomes that we all desire. But really, the starting point for all of this thinking should be the outcomes, because it's all about helping people to flourish. So again, we don't see our infrastructure as a series of construction projects. We see our infrastructure as a system that delivers services that then lead to the outcomes that we desire. I think it's a really important point, but one that we seldom alight on. And so I think if we have this people-focused view and we see the infrastructure, we can see that there are processes related to that infrastructure that again seldom get talked about very much. And so right at the heart of it would be the use of the infrastructure for the benefit of people. And then around that, we clearly operate and maintain the infrastructure to make the infrastructure available for use. But the core point is that if we're focused on people, then the use is the most important thing. And something to note is that these system processes have to go on forever. It's not a life cycle. The system doesn't have a life cycle. It needs to last forever. Now, assets do have life cycles, and we need to manage assets through those life cycles. But the assets are part of the system, and the system doesn't have a life cycle. And so the forever processes, the processes which have to go on for as long as we want our infrastructure to be there, and we want our infrastructure to be there and functioning as long as we want society to last, those forever processes are really all about use, operate and maintain. And then every now and again, we need some new infrastructure. So that's where we kick off this little pod at the side, where we plan, design, build and commission. But really, as I said a few moments back, that's an intervention on the system. And I think when we see our projects in those terms, then we can see it as a matter of integrating the projects into the system, integrating those interventions. So the start point and the end point needs to be the use. And I think sometimes in the construction industry, we think that the start point is planning, but something goes before that. So a change of perspective, but I think an important change of perspective that helps us to integrate new infrastructure into the system better, because we recognize the system. Then jumping on to sustainability, the sustainability point. And I think there's so much to talk about in this area, but I'll try and be brief. And the first thing I think is to recognize that something like 75% of the SDGs are related or are enabled by infrastructure. So that means our infrastructure has a huge part to play in helping to achieve the SDGs. So that's a good thing. We should take note of that. But also, we should recognize that our infrastructure itself needs to be sustainable. So that what I'm trying to say there is two things. One is that the infrastructure helps to achieve those sustainability goals, but it needs to be sustainable itself. And here is a little bit of a conundrum, in that if we want our infrastructure effectively to last forever, of course we replace it and there's a rollover. But if effectively we need it to last forever, then we must sustain it forever. And the thing that doesn't compute is if it's not sustainable. We cannot have something that must be sustained, but which is not sustainable. It just doesn't compute or doesn't work. And therefore, we must make our infrastructure sustainable. And so the whole idea of driving towards net zero, driving towards circular economy, these are key things. And what we should recognize is that those are systemic challenges that demand system-based solutions. We can't solve them in silos. And so it becomes essential that we use systems thinking to solve those massive grand challenges. It's an infrastructure issue, it's a systems issue. And then finally, on the digital point, And this is to say that because the unit cost of everything to do with data, whether it's collecting data, transmitting data, processing data, it has been dropping in an exponential way for years, we have an economic driver that means that digitalization is just a reality. It's happening. So we need to embrace it and get on with it. It means that digital transformation is absolutely inevitable. But this is a good thing, because so many of the other mega trends that are going on just now seem to be against us. But we can use digitalization entirely to our advantage to help deliver those flourishing systems that we talk about, to be a platform for human flourishing. And so what I mean by this is the whole idea of applying Industry 4.0 to infrastructure. It's recognizing the value of digital assets, not just physical assets. And I think that if we properly value them, then that means that we will manage them better. And at the moment, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're pretty good at valuing and managing physical assets, and we're not really very good at valuing and managing digital assets. So we need to recognize the value of digital assets. But when we bring digital and physical together, then we get smart. And that is really where the value gets unlocked, through smart infrastructure and the whole idea of digital twins, of connected digital twins. In the UK, one of the key things that I'm working on at the moment is the National Digital Twin, which we see as an ecosystem of connected twins. All of this is about exploiting that data for the benefit of people in infrastructure. So that was quite a quick whistle-stop tour through the high-level messages of this paper, and I think that what they all point to, and I guess this is in the context of the UK, is our articulated vision for digital-built Britain, and I think we've made a very good start around design and build, part of operate. Through the fantastic foundation that has been laid with BIM. And now, as we consider digital twins and connected digital twins, then we can move into the integrate phase. But the idea really of this big, imaginative, ambitious vision is really rooted in that systems thinking. And I guess I would put it quite strongly that if we don't see the systems, and if we don't pursue outcomes for people, then we won't actually unlock the value of the transformation that we have before us. So thank you very much. That was what I wanted to share. I'd be really happy to try and field some questions if you have them for me.
Hi everyone. So I think we may have a little bit of an issue with Luai's microphone. He's just managed to come back on now. But if anyone has any questions, can you just pop them in the Q&A box? Any questions for either Mark or Luai? Sorry, sometimes it takes a couple of minutes for people to start putting in the questions. Okay, so the first one is here, coming from Julian. He says, "Hi Mark, thank you very much for the presentation. What would be your perspective on stranded assets, especially assets that are currently not compatible with net zero?"
Yeah, that's a really important question, isn't it? And I'd be interested to know what type of assets those might be, because I guess some would still have residual value. But I think that there is a broader point about existing assets across the whole built environment, which aren't so much stranded, but they definitely weren't built with digital in mind. So I think that we have a great opportunity with our existing assets to kind of catch up. And those numbers that I shared, the kind of the 0.5% and the 99.5%, what that indicates is that if all we were to do was do our digitalization of the 0.5% that we add each year, it would take something like 200 years to build it across the whole piece. So it does mean that we must address existing assets. Now, I guess to the question, if an asset is genuinely stranded and has no value, then maybe what we'd be looking for is repurposing or recycling or something. But I'm not sure if that was the thrust of the question. I think that the real value is in recognizing that we can catch up with the assets that we've already got.
Mohammed also asks, how about political factors in Industry 4.0?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Mohammed asks, how about political factors in Industry 4.0?
Is that political factors?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? I think that if we are genuinely people-focused, and what we're looking for is the best outcomes in terms of economic, social, and environmental outcomes for people, then it becomes really important to involve people in working out what that balance is, because we can't have everything. There needs to be a balance. There are limited resources, and therefore, when it comes to working out what outcomes we're aiming for, it's really important to involve people in that discussion, because there has to be a trade-off, there has to be a balance. But then I think once we have identified what objectives we're aiming for, then we can start to use the system to deliver those outcomes that we're aiming for. And I think sometimes we're not entirely clear on what we're aiming for, and therefore it's very difficult to hit it. So I think when it comes to a political, and this is obviously political with a small p, I think it is a matter of ethics and politics to get to the right answer for our outcomes. Then I guess when it comes to the delivery, and maybe this is where the questioner's mind was going, when it comes to Industry 4.0, there are specific ethical questions, but I think that those questions need to be addressed with people rather than imposed on them.
Thank you. And then Abdul asks, hi Mark, how do we sell the idea of getting buy-in from clients and considering the system of system rather than the intervention?
I'm really sorry, you're not coming through clearly. Could you say that again?
Can you hear me now?
Not that well, it's a bit echoey.
So Abdul asks, he says, hi Mark, how do we sell the idea of getting buy-in from clients and considering the system of system rather than intervention?
Well, a lot of the work that we're doing in the UK is with clients. So there's something formed called the Infrastructure Client Group, which is a grouping of the UK's leading asset owners in infrastructure. And that group has been going in one form or another for about 10 years. And it's been of huge value because those asset owner operators share good practice with each other. And that good practice can address things like risk allocation or procurement. But one of the areas that they've been developing and sharing is in digital transformation, and that's been of great value. So what we're finding is that it's not so much a sell to the clients, that actually the clients are leading it because the clients see that there's value. And then we find that the supply chain lines up. So I think it's actually the other way round. It's more a case of the clients providing a lead and the supply chain following.
Thank you. Mohammed also asks, how could digitalization sustain forever?
How could digitalization sustain forever? So I guess this gets a bit philosophical, doesn't it? Because who knows? There might be something beyond digitalization. We're well into the fourth industrial revolution now. I don't suppose it's the last. I think, and this is kind of just musing, really. I think if you look at all the industrial revolutions that we've had so far, they've either been about energy or about information or some combination of that. And so I guess if our fourth industrial revolution is principally around information and trying to get the most out of information, bringing the digital and physical together, you could easily imagine a fifth industrial revolution, which is around energy again. Maybe it's where there's zero marginal cost energy, and what kind of world would that leave us in? So I don't think that we're at the end of our revolutions, and so digitalization I don't think is the ultimate end. I think it's a great enabler, and I think that it can help take us forward to this picture that I've tried to describe of flourishing systems. It's really getting the most out of our systems for the benefit of people, but I really don't think it's the end. So I think that digital is very likely to be with us for a long time. I hope that after a number of decades, we will have been through the transformation, and it will just be a completely normal thing. You wouldn't call it digital transformation by that time, but it would still be digital. In fact, we're already starting to see the beginnings of that, because people talk about digital delivery or digital engineering. It's not going to take very long before you don't need to call it digital engineering. So yeah, a little bit of a philosophical answer for you, but I hope that scratches the itch.
James Parker asks, do you see ESG funding as a further influence on the system in altering the content?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that terminology. ESG funding, what's that?
I'll just see if James will follow up with a...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Or just move on to the next question. Brendan Baker asks, it's hard to imagine some cities that only have 0.5% of the built form in construction. How do city shaping assets impact the system, and can we plan for that? For example, a new metro line or a new airport?
Yes. So I guess there's a few parts to the question. I think that the 0.5% is interesting, isn't it, as to whether it's believable. But if you add up the value of assets, and you could in different ways, replacement value or whatever, and then compare that to how much is spent on new assets each year, I think you get to a figure something like 0.5%. And so I was just trying to remember the precise numbers in the UK, because I had some, but this is from memory, so please don't shoot me if I get it wrong. But in the water industry, I think we have £350 billion worth of constructed assets. So that's all the water treatment works and the pipes, etc. And then each year we add 1.8 billion to it. So it's very significant. 1.8 billion pounds worth of investments is very significant. But when you compare it to 350 billion of what we already have, it gets you to that kind of zone. And I think that's what I was really trying to point to, is that the existing really matters and we need to attend to it. When it comes to the second part of the question, I think that, I'm sorry, there's a bit of an echo, which is making it hard to talk. If somebody could go on mute there. Thank you. So the second part of it, the kind of city shaping assets impact the system. I think this is fascinating, isn't it? Because if you're kind of beginning almost with a blank sheet of paper, you can build the city around the assets, but that rarely happens. You're normally building the assets around an existing city, and yes, of course, it impacts the city, and it needs some really clever planning to see how that impacts it. But I still think even with those massive city shaping type of assets, they are still an intervention on the system, and then the impact on the system really matters. So I don't have a brilliant answer to the question, just to say that those city shaping assets will just impact the system more than smaller assets, but it's still the same pattern. We should see it as an intervention on the system. Shall I keep going? I see another question here. Shall I just go for that? The 100% digitalization in traditional field of construction. I think yes, it might take some time, because I think with any technology adoption, there's always a curve, an S-curve, a typical technology adoption S-curve. And I think that we can see that spreading across construction. And so the most advanced organizations in construction are nearly fully digital already. There may well be some at the other end, at the kind of the tail end of the distribution curve, that will take longer. But I think that we could easily get to a position where everything that makes sense to be digitalized is. There'll still be some things which don't make sense to digitalize. And what we shouldn't do, I think, is try and drive digitalization where it just doesn't make sense. It should be driven by business case. But I think that we could, yes, expect 100% digitalization of the bits of construction that make sense.
Okay, so we've had an explanation of ESG come in. It says it's environmental, social and governance, understood to be more socially conscious investment, i.e. if it's climate change compatible. So James's original question was, do you see ESG funding as a further influence on the system in altering the content?
So yes. So we took a while for me to understand what the question was, and then the answer becomes very, very short. Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. And then the next question is, what is the connection between construction industry and infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I recognise the questioner here. So the construction industry would focus on that 0.5% of delivering new assets. I think that the infrastructure industry looks at the whole of infrastructure. So that would be for all of those infrastructure processes that I talked about. So that would include use, operate, maintain, as well as plan, design, build, and commission. So construction industry focused on construction, infrastructure industry focused on the bigger piece. In other words, the 100%, not the 0.5%.
Okay, great. And then the next question is, what is the strategy for selling the USP around flourishing systems and gaining new clients since the infrastructure is not as old or developed? Do we consider a bottom approach?
I think that this is a bigger thing than an individual company's USP. So I don't think that Mott MacDonald could claim a kind of ownership of a systems-based thinking and a focus on benefits for people and society. That's a bigger thing. I think what we can do within Mott MacDonald is advocate that vision, a vision which is both people-focused and systems-based. But I don't think we can own it. And I feel that the way forwards really is to socialize this kind of vision, because I do think it's a very attractive vision. I think it's absolutely right that we should focus on benefit for people and society. And I also think that it's absolutely right that we can get a lot more value out of our systems if we see them and manage them as systems. So I think that it would make sense for that bigger, ambitious vision to be socialized and bought into across the piece, across the industry. But then within it, I think some organizations will bring more value than others, because that they will going to really understand that the opportunities and the value that can be brought. And I would obviously, because I'm CTO Mott MacDonald, obviously think that Mott MacDonald is incredibly well placed to do that. But what I don't think is that we can kind of own the whole vision. It's a bigger thing than that, and we want to be part of it. We want to help move it forwards, because we see social outcomes, inclusive social outcomes, as being incredibly important for our purpose, actually, as a company. So we want to be part of it, but we can't own it.
Okay, great. And the next question is, what is the motivation for all of this?
I'm feeling that these are deep philosophical questions now. Maybe I'm just in a philosophical mood, and I'm reading everything that way. I think that the motivation goes really deep, actually, because if what we're talking about here is genuine human flourishing, this is for the good of good of people, for the good of our families, and not just our families now, but our children and grandchildren, and providing an environment within which they're safe and happy, an environment within which they're flourishing. I don't think there can be a bigger motivation than that. It definitely goes a long way beyond just making some money. I think that if we get this right, then there will also be a flourishing economy and flourishing businesses within that. But to my mind, the overall motivation has to be about people flourishing, and what better motivation can there be than that?
And then the next question is, through digitalization in construction and other industries, we encourage sustainability, reduce, reuse and recycle. The question is producing zero waste a possibility?
Yeah, so I guess if we're being kind of really pernickety about it, I think it's impossible to produce absolutely zero waste, but we can produce a lot less waste than we are now. And also we can move very much closer towards having a circular economy. So that's not really seeing things as waste, but seeing it as a resource for something going forwards in the future. Now, we don't think that way in infrastructure just yet. This circular economy thinking is developing very nicely in white goods, and you can see some really interesting progress in Europe in that way, but we just haven't applied it to infrastructure yet, and yet we could, because we can see that there's very valuable materials that we build into our assets, and we shouldn't just see those resources having one life cycle, where we dig it out of the ground, we use it once, and then we throw it away. It really needs to be that we can see it having lots of future lives, and so this idea of having assets managed through individual life cycles, we're getting good at that, and ISO 55000 helps us, but we haven't gone to that next place of managing resources through multiple life cycles, and we absolutely definitely can do that. Maybe not down to it literally being zero waste. I think there's always going to be something pops out the back end, but surely we can do very, very much better than we are now.
Great. And then Chris asks, digital twins are becoming the buzzword for the construction industry. How do you ensure their importance in flourishing systems without oversaturation and misunderstanding of where they fit in the digital ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris, because I think very often technologies come up and they get overhyped, and then there's inevitable disappointment, and then people go off and invent another word for the same thing. So you're right, that there is a real danger that it just becomes a buzzword. There's also a danger that because it seems like the fun thing to be on just now, that people will take a basic model and say, well, yesterday I called it a model, today I'll call it a digital twin, but it's actually no different. It's the same thing, and it's not really a digital twin at all. So that there, I guess, will be a bit of confusion in there too. However, I think underlying that, there's something which is more important, and that for me is that technology needs to be an enabler. It needs to provide a service to something else for a higher purpose. Technology can never be an end in itself, and so I don't actually think that we should see digital twins as an individual technology. What I think is that technology can serve digital twins, and we can use technology in digital twins. And so you can definitely see how digital twins can integrate various different types of technology. So from sensor technology, collecting data from the environment, technology to do with IoT to get from the environment into the digital twin, technology on doing very clever things with data, AI, machine learning, and then at the other end, for people to interface with the digital twin, you can see all sorts of visualization, immersive technology to help us with that. So you can see how digital twins can actually bring various bits of technology together. But the point that I really want to make is that underlying it, there's something more important that I don't think will go, because technology will keep coming and it will keep going, and technology kind of will always be coming up with something new. But underneath a digital twin is the concept of an an information value chain. And what that is about taking data, doing something clever with it, which gives us insight, which then enables us to make better decisions. And based on those better decisions, we can drive interventions back in the physical world that deliver better outcomes. And so that connection between data, interventions, decisions, data, insight, decisions, interventions, and outcomes is something that I think will outlast the technology that serves it. I think that is at the core of a digital twin. Therefore, we shouldn't see digital twins as something which is just purely technology based. There's something more important going on, and it's about getting value out of information.
Great. And the next question is, can introducing a certain system/product during the design stage lead to more sustainability of the system?
Yes, I'm sure it can. And obviously it depends on the system, the product. But I think that it's really important as early as possible to be thinking about sustainability in assets and in the system. In some cases, we might think so early that we can come up with other solutions, which mean you don't actually have to build anything at all. And clearly, if you're not building anything at all, then that's going to have lower carbon. So there's, I think, really the earlier we can do the clever thinking, the better. But yes, certainly in the design stage, you can imagine all sorts of useful systems and products which would drive greater sustainability. I also think that at the design stage, we can consider designing for reuse or repurposing or doing something with the asset past its initial life. At the moment, clearly, when we design for one life rather than multiple.
Great, and I think that's all the questions that we've had so far. If anyone has any additional questions for Mark, if you just want to pop them in the Q&A box now. We've got 10 minutes left, so if you do need to ask any questions now would be great. We'll give it a couple of minutes and see if any more come in.
Like, could I ask a question back to the audience, and maybe they can put something in the chat. So I guess my simple question would be, does this message of flourishing systems, so in other words, people focused, systems based, does it resonate? Does it kind of make sense in your context, or does it seem just all too theoretical and conceptual? So yeah, I'd be really interested to understand from the audience if this kind of message actually resonates.
Just trying to see if I can put it as a poll.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Just going to say, the question is, does this resonate as a
vision?
Just seeing.
I guess it could just be a simple yes no, and then maybe in the chat people could say ideas as to how a high level vision can be turned into the language of policy or into the language of delivery. Because I think what I've put across today is really quite a kind of a high level philosophical kind of visionary thing. But what would be great would be to understand how, if it does resonate, how could that be turned into the language of policy and delivery?
So we've had some answers come in. Just to let everyone know, there's also a poll. You can find it in the same area as the Q&A box. So we've just added the poll in there. And then obviously we've had some answers coming in from everyone who are saying yes. So the results of the poll is 100% yes. It's currently at 16 responses, well, 17, 18. Everyone is basically saying yes, it does resonate as a vision.
Okay, that's good.
I think we've had another question come in. It's saying, Nimish asks, as a vision, but will it not be too complex?
Yeah. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff just now going on complex systems and emergent properties. And in fact, before this call, I was just listening to somebody who was talking about complex economics on the basis that classical economics has let us down a bit, and it's kind of oversimplified. And really, the argument was that in complex systems which actually are complex systems, what we should do is address them in all their complexity rather than oversimplify them into models that don't work. So I think that the basic answer to that is yes, we should embrace the complexity. There's an emerging science around it, complexity science, and some fantastic developments that I think give some confidence that we can address complex systems, even systems which are as complex as our built environment. I also think that the idea of connected digital twins will have a part to play in this space. So the idea of that is that you would have a digital twin with a particular purpose in parts of the network. So it could be a digital twin of an asset or a digital twin of a network or an entire system. But if that twin can talk to another twin of another network, then that can model quite nicely and represent the complex system. So an example of that would be if you've got a digital twin of the transport network, you've also got a digital twin of the energy network. Making a connection between them, sharing data across them, can then help both of them, and it can help to model the system better. So it's a long way around answering the question, but I think that there's increasing confidence that we can address complex systems. Yes.
Great. I think that's everything in terms of question and answers, unless you'd like to ask another question to the audience as well.
No, I think I've been cheeky enough. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, Luai's had a couple of technical issues today, so he won't be coming on for the end of this portion. But I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Luai and Mark today for your presentation. It's very insightful, and obviously we will be sharing the recording and the copy of the presentation as well that you can watch back in your own time and just go through as well. So you'll have that within the next 2 to 3 days. Thank you again so much, Mark, for today, and we look forward to welcoming everyone to the next webinar.